When we look closely at the economic powerhouse of the Pacific Northwest, the massive states of Washington and Oregon immediately stand out as home to some of the most dynamic, high-growth metropolitan regions on Earth. From the sprawling, high-tech global titan of Seattle and the culturally dominant, bustling valleys of Portland, down to the smaller but still highly prominent regional hubs of Spokane and Eugene, there is absolutely no shortage of major cities defining this landscape. Yet, if you trace your finger along the actual geographic maps, a chilling and bizarre paradox emerges. Every single one of these massive concrete jungles is systematically built far away from the open ocean, leaving a staggering, hundreds of miles long stretch of the Pacific coastline completely barren without any major cities to call its own. In a world where global maritime trade, deep water logistics, and historic empires have almost exclusively flourished right on the edge of the sea, this empty, desolate coast stands as a profound anomaly. So why exactly are there no major cities along Washington and Oregon's coastline? Why did humanity collectively choose to retreat inland, abandoning one of the longest ocean frontiers in North America? At the absolute heart of this geopolitical mystery, of course, is the region's incredibly unique, hostile, and uncompromising physical geography. The sprawling coastline of Oregon and Washington is fundamentally defined by its deeply dramatic, unforgiving physical geography, a punishing maritime landscape that is quite unlike any other part of the United States. This severe wilderness stands in stark, jarring contrast to the long, sun-drenched sandy beaches that most people globally associate with classic oceanfront states. Stretching relentlessly from the northernmost reaches of the Olympic Peninsula in Washington down to the picturesque, winding shores of the Oregon coast in the south, this narrow strip of isolated land is stunning geographically, but historically, it has proven to be an absolute logistical nightmare. At its northern frontier, the Olympic Peninsula exists as a wild, completely untamed region where the laws of nature rule supreme. Here, the jagged peaks of the Olympic Mountains rise dramatically straight out of the earth. Their western slopes are violently drenched by some of the highest recorded annual rainfall in all of North America, directly feeding dense temperate rainforests that aggressively stretch nearly to the very edge of the roaring ocean. In fact, specific isolated sectors of the Olympic Peninsula, most notably the famous Hoh Rainforest, are bombarded by as much as 12 feet of rain every single year. To put this mind-bending volume into a shocking geographic perspective, just 75 miles to the east, the famously wet and rainy metropolitan city of Seattle receives a mere 40 inches of rain per year. This colossal atmospheric disparity proves just how localized and hostile the coastal climate truly is. The coastline itself is an aggressive gauntlet, primarily composed of sheer, rocky headlands, hidden secluded coves, and long, desolate beaches strewn with massive driftwood shattered and shaped by relentless ocean waves and the violent, continuous uplift of deep tectonic forces. Moving southward into Washington's Grays Harbor and Willamette Bay, the intense Washington coast slightly softens into broader, muddy estuaries and shifting sandy spits, a direct testament to powerful, high-volume rivers such as the Chehalis and the Willapa that drain the deep interior of the state to meet the crushing sea. Continuing further south into neighboring Oregon, the scenic Oregon coast truly lives up to its legendary reputation. This breathtaking stretch of terrain running from the mouth of the Columbia River all the way to the California border is globally renowned for its iconic sea stacks towering prehistoric rock formations, carved out over millennia of intense oceanic erosion and dramatic collapsing cliffs. Here, the land is trapped in a constant dynamic war with the Pacific Ocean, revealing complex tide pools teeming with marine life at low tide and offering stunning, sweeping vistas from countless viewpoints along the famous winding Highway 101, the heavily protected Samuel H. Boardman's scenic corridor, tucked away in the far southern reaches of Oregon's coastline, is particularly renowned for this jaw-dropping, volatile beauty. So much so that it has frequently been under serious political consideration to officially become Oregon's second national park. Geographically surrounding and isolating this long, pristine coastal strip are the formidable Pacific Coast Ranges, of which the massive Olympic Mountains are a primary part. This endless series of relatively low but incredibly rugged mountains runs perfectly parallel to the roaring Pacific Ocean through the entirety of both Oregon and Washington. While they're admittedly not as high or volcanic as the snow-capped Cascade Mountains located further inland, the coastal range effectively acts as a colossal geographic wall, completely isolating the immediate ocean coast from the vast inland valleys of the Pacific Northwest. Its steep, impossibly dense, heavily forested slopes and notoriously difficult terrain make the entire coastal area incredibly challenging for infrastructure to traverse. However, this mountain wall also performs a vital function. It serves as a shield that protects the interior valleys from a relentless deluge of ocean precipitation. You see, the extreme climate of this coast is a defining, unavoidable characteristic of the entire Pacific Northwest region. Frequently classified by meteorologists as a highly modified oceanic climate, it is overwhelmingly cool, persistently wet, and notably windy, especially during the brutal autumn and winter months. The immediate proximity to the vast, freezing waters of the Pacific Ocean, combined with the intense orographic lift caused by the steep coastal range, guarantees a non-stop supply of abundant, heavy precipitation for the entire coastal zone. But because the coastal range forces the rain clouds to dump their massive payloads directly on the coast, interior geographic havens such as the fertile Willamette Valley remain relatively dry, highly predictable, and infinitely more livable for human civilization. This non-stop, abundant rainfall also severely impacts the overall comfortability and psychological weight of the coastal region. While local temperatures are heavily moderated by the ocean, rarely ever reaching freezing or scorching extremes in either direction, the persistent, heavy cloud cover, frequent rain, and pervasive, bone-chilling dampness create a lush, emerald landscape that feels perpetually gray, somber, and overcast. Furthermore, powerful prevailing westerly winds frequently sweep completely unchecked across the open, volatile ocean, brutally buffeting the exposed coastline and massively adding to the haunting sense of absolute isolation and vulnerability. This unforgiving combination of a rugged, wall-like topography and a deeply challenging, waterlogged climate is precisely what profoundly paralyzed and influenced the historic patterns of human habitation, completely shaping the modern development of this enigmatic region. Long before the first European sailing ships tentatively cut through the freezing regional waters, exploring its endless labyrinth of intricate inlets, muddy rivers, and jagged bays, this deeply rugged frontier of North America was home to thriving, highly sophisticated indigenous societies. For thousands of years, numerous native nations inhabited this treacherous coastal strip. Powerful, seafaring tribes such as the Chinook, Clatsop, Tillamook, Quinault, Makah, and many more intricately flourished here, establishing complex trade networks heavily reliant on the sea. Now, perhaps the most terrifying and geographically fascinating chapter of history regarding these coastal tribes prior to European contact is the fact that these people were and historically remain the only human beings to directly feel the catastrophic wrath of the legendary 9-magnitude Cascadia Megathrust earthquake. On the fateful evening of the 26th of January 1700, the oceanic Juan de Fuca plate violently and abruptly slipped beneath the massive North American plate along a 600-mile fault zone, triggering one of the most powerful seismological events the planet has ever experienced. The geological rupture released such a colossal, earth-shattering volume of energy that it instantly birthed a monstrous tsunami, crossing the entire expanse of the open Pacific Ocean to strike the coastlines of Japan. Through the haunting oral histories passed down across generations within these native tribes, We know that this dual catastrophe of a mega earthquake and a towering wall of water was instantly and completely destructive to their coastal civilization. In fact, modern demographic estimates from leading anthropologists suggest that anywhere from 30% to a staggering, apocalyptic 95% of all indigenous populations living directly on the exposed coast were instantly killed. This horrifying event explains precisely why so few Native Americans were physically found occupying the immediate coast when European explorers arrived decades later. Their coastal cities and populations simply did not exist in the same massive quantities as they had previously. European contact with these surviving communities began in the late 1700s, primarily driven by high-stakes global geopolitics, specifically the desperate search for the mythical Northwest Passage and the highly lucrative maritime fur trade. Spanish, British, and American empires aggressively charted the wild coast, with iconic maritime figures like Captain James Cook and George Vancouver making monumental contributions to mapping the jagged architecture of the region. Unfortunately for the indigenous nations, they would soon be decimated yet again by a silent, invisible killer entirely beyond their control. Smallpox, measles, and other deadly diseases carried directly by the European sailors. This massive biological disruption marked the permanent end of their traditional way of life and initiated profound, irreversible changes to the regional landscape. A pivotal moment in the American continental narrative of exploration occurred when the famous Lewis and Clark expedition finally reached the roaring shores of the Pacific Ocean in November 1805. To solidify their claim to the Northwest, they hastily established Fort Clatsop near the vital mouth of the Columbia River, spending the brutal, wet winter of 1805 to 1806 trapped inside its wooden walls. While their physical stay on the coast was relatively brief, it symbolically and legally authorized American sovereign claims to the massive Oregon country, a strategic territory that the rival empires of Great Britain, Spain, and even Imperial Russia were aggressively angling to capture. Furthermore, the expedition provided invaluable, highly detailed documentation of the local topography, its raw resources, and its indigenous inhabitants. Most importantly, the explorers' daily journals painted a vivid, discouraging picture of the hostile climate and impenetrable terrain. Crucial geographic insights that would heavily paralyze future settlement plans. Their journals specifically noted that while the mouth of the Columbia River seemed like a logical gateway for commerce, the immediate surroundings were far too punishing for standard urbanization. Following in the footsteps of these government explorers, corporate fur traders and Christian missionaries slowly arrived, leading to the gradual establishment of the region's first modern outposts. These early ventures, however, immediately found themselves fighting a losing battle against the formidable geographic and climatic realities of the coast. Unlike the completely sheltered, deep water harbors of the Puget Sound, or the immensely fertile, flat agricultural havens of the Willamette Valley located further inland, the immediate Pacific coast offered virtually zero natural advantages for large-scale urban development. Coastal settlements like Astoria, founded in 1811 by John Jacob Astor's Pacific Fur Company near the turbulent mouth of the Columbia River, were strategically vital for regional fur monopolies, but faced immense, everyday logistical difficulties. While Astoria eventually managed to claw its way into becoming a significant regional port, its entire economic development was inherently choked by its absolute reliance on accessing the interior via the Columbia River Channel. This channel proved to be home to one of the most violent, unpredictable, and dangerous river mouths on the face of the earth. A terrifying maritime hazard that has rightfully garnered the grim nickname of the Graveyard of the Pacific. Other early corporate attempts at establishing permanent coastal communities were quickly reduced to small, isolated, and economically vulnerable outposts, primarily surviving on raw logging, localized fishing, or minor commodities trading. Coos Bay in southern Oregon and Aberdeen in western Washington were both specifically founded to build up maritime trade along the immediate Pacific Northwest coast. Yet, despite their strategic positions, both settlements were ultimately and severely hampered by a fundamental psychological reality. A total lack of desire for prospective settlers to move out to where the actual open ocean was located. Which brings us to the final looming question. Even after more than a century of consistent modern American infrastructure development, why do major million-resident cities completely refuse to form along the Pacific Northwest coast? The striking, almost unnatural absence of major cities along the roaring Pacific Ocean coastline of Oregon and Washington is not a bizarre historical accident. It stands in stark, jarring contrast to the state of California, which boasts multiple, massive, globally dominant metropolitan hubs built directly along its coastal waters. This deep discrepancy is the direct consequence of a brutal confluence of formidable geographic barriers, unforgiving climatic traps, and highly strategic economic calculations. When you calculate the entire demographic footprint of this coast, running all the way from the remote tip of the Olympic Peninsula in the north to the jagged California border in the south, this entire mega region is home to just about 600,000 people. This is a staggeringly low number, representing far fewer inhabitants than either the individual metropolitan boundaries of Portland or Seattle. So, what exactly is going on here? Why does a coastal titan like San Francisco successfully exist down south, while absolutely nothing equivalent has managed to emerge in the north? Perhaps the most insurmountable impediment to large-scale coastal urbanization was the brutal architecture of the coastal range. This jagged mountain barrier, running perfectly parallel to the roaring ocean, created an immediate, persistent, and multi-generational challenge to simple accessibility. The range's steep, chaotic, and heavily forested slopes made overland logistics exceptionally difficult, dangerous, and astronomically expensive for early, pioneering settlers. This completely isolated the exposed coast from the far more promising and predictable interior valleys. Building critical infrastructure like early trade roads and heavy transcontinental railways across this rugged, wall-like terrain was a monumental, resource-draining undertaking. This bottleneck severely choked the ability to transport bulk goods to and from the coast, an absolute prerequisite for significant long-term urban growth. For a port city to truly thrive, it requires robust, fluid connections to its immediate hinterland for natural resources and consumer markets. The unforgiving topography of the coastal range largely denied the Pacific Northwest coast this essential economic artery. In fact, even when early settlers managed to painstakingly cut primitive paths and dirt roads through the mountain passes, the intense weather patterns ensured that these vital links would completely wash out and disappear basically every single season. This logistical vulnerability leads us directly back to the region's notoriously harsh, waterlogged climate. The Pacific Northwest coast is characterized by a relentless, bone-chilling coolness, a pervasive and rotting wetness, and strong, almost incessant atmospheric winds, particularly through the long, draining autumn and winter months. This brutal environment, while perfectly designed for fostering lush, prehistoric, temperate rainforests, was exceptionally challenging for early European settlers who desperately sought to establish reliable agriculture or permanent urban communities. This environmental friction has stubbornly maintained its grip through the decades. The constant, suffocating dampness, severely limited annual sunshine, and exposure to violent oceanic storms continue to make commercial farming difficult, infrastructure construction arduous, and simply living there an often uncomfortable, psychologically heavy experience. Early imperial attempts at sustaining permanent coastal settlement were frequently hampered, if not outright defeated, by these unforgiving climatic conditions. Many fledgling outposts remained incredibly small, desperately isolated, and constantly struggled for mere survival. This failure laid the permanent cultural groundwork for a widespread perception of the coast as completely inhospitable for grand urban design. Even today, in the modern era, very few people are physically or mentally able to weather the coastal weather for an entire year. This reality is clearly reflected in the vast graveyard of early European settlements along this particular stretch of coast that completely failed to achieve significant scale or lasting prosperity, quickly collapsing into very specialized, low population industries like seasonal logging or localized fishing. While indigenous communities successfully thrived for millennia by strategically living with the land, the aggressive European model of large-scale urbanization and deep resource extraction found the direct coastal environment far less amenable than other nearby regions. This was largely due to a critical geographic missing puzzle piece: a near total lack of natural, deep-water, easily accessible harbors that could safely accommodate massive global sailing ships. This deficit, coupled with the extreme, lethal dangers of oceanic navigation near a rocky, storm-battered shore, further disincentivized major maritime commerce from ever anchoring here. But ultimately, the most decisive factor in the coast's total lack of major cities was simply the magnetic pull of vastly superior geographic alternatives located just a short distance inland. In Washington, the completely sheltered, deep-water harbors of the Puget Sound, offering natural, absolute protection from violent oceanic storms and effortless access to vast timber empires, presented the ideal location for global port cities. Because of this natural geographic shield, cities like Seattle, Tacoma, and Everett phenomenally flourished, rapidly transforming into major multi-billion-dollar hubs of international trade, heavy industry, and massive population concentration. Similarly, in Oregon, the extraordinarily flat and fertile Willamette Valley presented an unparalleled paradise for agricultural potential. Perfectly protected on both sides by the rugged coastal range and the volcanic Cascade Mountains, this valley quickly became the unstoppable economic heartland of the state. It fostered the rapid rise of major inland cities like Portland and Eugene, both of which massively benefited from their strategic locations along the massive Columbia and Willamette rivers. These river systems provided a fluid, navigable waterway all the way out to the Pacific Ocean without ever requiring the cities or their infrastructure to be directly exposed to the hostile, unpredictable forces of the open ocean coast. Today, the modern legacy of this geographic reality remains absolute. The combinations of the coastal range operating as a physical barrier, the harsh, overcast climate, the economic struggles of early coastal settlements, and crucially, the undeniable, overwhelming advantages offered by the interior hubs of the Puget Sound and the Willamette Valley create a massive systemic detriment to people moving to either state's Pacific coast, with just 600,000 residents scattered across this massive ocean border. This entire coastal area comprises a mere 5% of both states' entire combined populations. This is a truly crazy statistic when you realize that global human populations heavily prefer living right on the edge of the open ocean, just clearly not the open coast of the Pacific Northwest. The immediate coastline of Washington and Oregon remains undeniably one of the most beautiful, pristine, and breathtaking places in the entire country. But I'd be lying if I said that the endless, non-stop onslaught of freezing rain and howling wind wasn't an absolute deterrent for most of humanity, even for someone like me who genuinely loves the rain. I hope you enjoy learning all about the mysterious, empty coast of the Pacific Northwest. If you did, be sure to click right now to check out our video on the shocking geographic secrets of the 7 hidden continents. Thanks for watching GeoAtlas, and we will see you in the next exploration.